And just to add one thing, if you're serious about diversifying your reach to underrepresented founders, the best way to do that is to start with your network. Look at your LinkedIn, look at your other social networks, and look at who you're connected to and what the demographics look like. If you have work to do, then start there by getting to know more diverse people in your field and broaden your reach. So if you're used to warm intros, broaden your reach of who can give you a warm intro, and you'll start to see things change.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Confident Investor. Today, I'm here with Christie Pitts and Brittany Davis, partners at Backstage Capital, an investment fund focused on investing in people of color, women, and LGBTQ plus founders, where currently less than 10% of all venture funds go to these groups. Whereas other VCs see this as a pipeline problem, Backstage Capital sees it as the biggest opportunity in investment. Data shows again and again that diverse teams perform better and diverse investors make better investment decisions. In fact, Morgan Stanley estimates that there's more than $4 trillion unrealized in venture capital due to the lack of diversity in investment decisions. To date, Backstage Capital has invested in more than 150 companies led by underrepresented founders since 2015, and they've become the brand for underrepresented founders. Welcome, Brittany and Christie, to The Confident Investor.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. We're glad to be here.
So I'd just love to start with the story behind how and why Backstage started, because as we know, even though it's a cultural shifting moment today, it was definitely an uphill battle to even get Backstage launched and taken seriously.
Yeah, so I'll start. So Backstage was started by Arlen Hamilton, who's our founding partner. And, she recognized that basically what you already said, Lisa, that essentially a lot of venture capital was not going to certain groups of people that had high potential companies. There were lots of entrepreneurs that she knew and could, source for venture capital, but they weren't getting into the VCs that would do the deals. So she saw this as a gap and not just something that, would be nice to have, but actually a really strong business opportunity. So she actually started in 2015, got her first investment for the fund and started investing in women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders, again, because this was something that at the time and still to this day, these founders are being overlooked. And it's really strong from an investment perspective. If you can source these companies where everyone's looking, in one direction, kind of pattern matching for kind of a similar founder, similar profile that we've seen be successful in the past, and not looking beyond that, you're just missing out on a lot of different types of founders. So by focusing exclusively on these founders that aren't getting capital, you can really make a lot of strong investments in this area. That's kind of how we started.
Yeah, and just to add to that, although it's been really well documented about the bias in venture capital and how so few dollars go to underrepresented founders, other parts of the business landscape have started to recognize this and change much earlier than venture has. So for example, big brands like Clorox and McDonald's and others started putting together initiatives to address diverse consumers as far back as like the 90s or early 2000s. And so although it does seem like 2015 was kind of a long time ago and venture is catching up, we still have so much work to do in order to address the opportunity, both from a social perspective and from a business perspective.
So what can people do if they are interested in investing in underrepresented founders? Where do they go to source those deals? Where do you guys go to source those deals?
Yeah, so shameless plug. If you'd like to invest in underrepresented founders, let us know. We actually have an initiative called Backstage Crowd where you can invest with us, and we'll help you find that deal flow. But I think to answer the question more broadly, there effectively, it's being available to underrepresented founders and understanding what your network looks like and who you have in your network. There are thousands of qualified underrepresented founders. And at Backstage, we access this great deal flow through a variety of ways. One of them is through our open application process. So for example, anybody can go at any time to backstagecapital.com/apply and apply for investment. But we also get access to founders in other ways as well. We get introductions from other investors, from founders in our portfolio, and we're deliberate. We'll do outreach in certain areas or speak at events and meet founders and things of that nature.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like this is something that's really broken within venture. Like if you think about kind of the space in general, it has not really evolved in terms of how people do business, and has not kept up with kind of especially the demographic shifts that we're seeing, kind of especially in the US. So now, if you're forward looking, you're going to see that the country is going to be, minority majority country within a couple decades. And if you're still operating by, what's in your own closed network, maybe you're not actually being exposed to some of these demographic shifts that are happening today and then will be in the future. So kind of as Christie was mentioning, one of the kind of tactics that Backstage has been using is really providing access to founders. So if you're interested in investing in more diverse founders, it's kind of being open to those kind of demographic shifts and realizing that things are kind of changing in the world around us. But also, how do I capture these founders? A lot of it is that you can be open to meeting folks that are not just, a warm intro away. It's more about like providing that access. So, opening yourself up to opportunity is really where it starts. And I think we've provided good ways to do that through, again, like the open application. But I think also being open to different opportunities that you might not know all about, and being open to a founder explaining to you and educating you about an area that might not be something that you're already aware of as a problem. So I think it's kind of on those fronts.
And just to add one thing, if you're serious about diversifying your reach to underrepresented founders, the best way to do that is to start with your network. Look at your LinkedIn, look at your other social networks, and look at who you're connected to and what the demographics look like. If you have work to do, then start there by getting to know more diverse people in your field and broaden your reach. So if you're used to warm intros, broaden your reach of who can give you a warm intro, and you'll start to see things change.
So Backstage has done a really great job of not only investing and seeing those returns, but building a brand as a fund. And that, I think, is a big part of what attracts founders, right? Who see and hear Arlen's story and say, this reminds me of me, or these are the same struggles that I've gone through. But even once founders come in, and let's say someone is able to create that sort of open access brand for themselves, oftentimes we see that there are still biased questions that are asked. We see this all the time when investors ask female founders biased questions. And I'm sure that happens across the board. So what are some key questions that you think are important to ask that remove some of this unconscious bias when you are vetting founders?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions really need to be framed in more potential versus a lot of underrepresented folks get asked questions that are essentially highlighting some of the risk or the concern that the investors have, where I really think if you're being as open to the idea of investing in underrepresented founders, you really should be looking in potential. So I think even framing the questions, like I think there's a study that was done with women founders where it's not really, a lot of investors are not necessarily asking kind of the upside or kind of the opportunity that they're working on, but more on, the downside and kind of risk protection, if that makes sense. So I think even if it's not specific questions, it's even how you think about the questions so that you're keeping your mind open to see an opportunity and learn about that versus saying, oh, I've never seen that, or how can they possibly do that? And you don't have this, kind of all those negative questions of, framed in risk are really limiting. And I think that's something that I've noticed just kind of seeing and hearing founders that experience that from VCs that don't really get them. I think they're not really trying to understand.
And something that investors can do to solve for this, because I think a lot of it happens in the moment, right? An investor will be talking to a founder, maybe they're talking to a female founder, and it's a product that's aimed at a women's market, and the investor feels like they can't identify. And so maybe they start shutting down or not able to see that full picture of the upside. So controlling the questions that you ask every founder and getting into habits of specific questions is very helpful here. Of course, you're going to ask questions that are specific to the founder and their company, but if you standardize let's say the first 15 or 20 questions, the basic questions you ask about the business, and you really listen to the founder as they're answering, then you can start to really build out and change the narrative from where you began. And you move away from putting the founder on the defensive of defending why they're building the company that they're building or defending why it's a big opportunity. And you're giving the founder opportunity to really highlight what could be.
That's such a great point, because this idea of defensiveness, and I know that as a woman of color that people have so often, whether I was fundraising, whether I was entering into various VC spaces, you notice when you start becoming defensive, and you ask yourself, how did I end up in this place where I'm defending myself versus speaking from a place of true abundance and talking about all the potential in the future? So I think there's also the onus of not only the investor, but the founder to realize when that's happening in the moment and push back on it and say, actually, I'm going to answer the question this way.
Mm-hmm. Reframing the question. Yeah,
definitely. What challenges does Backstage still have? Because as we know, this is still an evolving conversation. Not everyone is yet bought into the idea that diversity at the table brings great business returns, even though the data is there. So how do you overcome those challenges when there are people who are pushing back on it and still questioning in the way that we mentioned, where they're not asking about potential, but they are focusing on the risk?
I think the fact is that it's not our job to convince everybody. We're doing the work to invest in and support underrepresented founders over the long term. And luckily for us, there are thousands of people who do agree that this is great work, and they're also willing to help these founders. And there are a lot of people in the venture ecosystem who have a very open philosophy, and they're willing to fund these founders as well. And luckily, also, I think the perceptions are changing quite a bit. And so it is still a real challenge for underrepresented founders to access capital. But that just means that there's work to be done. And that's the work that we're doing, is helping the founders build those relationships, get their company to the place it needs to be, and then go up to the next level.
Yeah, and I still think there's still some amount of questioning on, is there enough of a pipeline of really strong, high potential underrepresented founders? And I think, unfortunately, founders are still facing that doubt from some investors. And yeah, to Christie's point, like, not everyone is going to believe that. And I think I'm encouraged when I see, more and more of our portfolio founders, as well as just founders in the ecosystem, continuing to either, raise big rounds, or we see, more and more women IPOing, and or other metrics, really strong revenue and building momentum. We're starting to see that more, especially as I look through like the 5 years of Backstage's journey and just like the journey in the ecosystem. Things are improving, but it's still a gap. There's still less than 1% of capital is going to Black founders, so we still have a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the future going in terms of where the fund is going, and what are you most excited about?
I don't know, Christie, you want to start?
Sure. So I think what we'll see, first of all, is we're going to continue to see success in the portfolio, and that's just going to be incredible, because success begets success when it comes to changing diversity across the tech landscape. And what I mean by that is we know that when you invest in diverse founders, they hire diverse teams. And then when they go on to have an exit event, those are the people that become wealthy from that exit. There's also significant data that shows it's not just founders underrepresented founders that are shortchanged when it comes to capital access, but underrepresented people in tech in terms of their equity positions also are shortchanged. And so investing in diverse founders helps to assuage some of that and close some of that gap. So first of all, just seeing our portfolio founders and other underrepresented founders in the community succeed and create that wealth for themselves and that wealth for their team, then goes on to help seed these diverse ecosystems. And we're starting to see this already with some of the founders, our early founders in our portfolio. So that's one thing that excites me about the future. We're not doing this work in a silo or in a vacuum. All of the founders that we invest in are building companies that are impacting their communities and all of their stakeholders. And so the impact is magnified.
Yeah, and I'm super excited, kind of in a different lane, is that getting more capital to underrepresented founders, a lot of that, or the barrier there, is that the capital writers, the check writers, have been historically from kind of one group of people, very similar backgrounds. And, I'm seeing that more and more emerging managers of color are launching funds, more women are launching funds, and more individuals are starting to invest. So angel investing is something that I'm seeing, more and more folks get involved. And, Backstage has avenues where you can do that too. I think Christie already mentioned kind of Backstage Crowd, where we do have a group of syndicate where we share investments with a group of angels. So, and we see the crowdfunding has also picked up with awareness and bigger deals. So I think there's something happening with more and more people getting involved, and then that will in turn, I think, diversify a lot of the capital getting to diverse founders. I think when it's just held by kind of the same group of traditional VCs, you'll see the same types of companies again and again get funding. And the more we have kind of this, either the crowd getting involved or, angels, other VCs get starting, I'm loving that. And I'm seeing more and more of it. So something to really get excited about in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I love this two sides of the table, kind of full cycle of getting more underrepresented founders, but also more underrepresented investors, and that you guys have focused on making sure that the investors in Backstage Capital are also reflective of your investment thesis. So could you touch upon what you guys have done, which was really groundbreaking in terms of the crowdfunding campaign that you did with Republic?
Yes. So equity crowdfunding, I believe, is the future of early stage startup investing. And I'm really glad that Backstage can be part of this initiative that's groundbreaking and allowing anybody to invest in Backstage with a minimum check size of $100. And I think that this is important for a couple of reasons. Brittany just spoke a moment ago about the importance of more people moving into angel investing and diversifying check writing. And until Backstage and others launched their crowdfunding initiatives, if you wanted to have the opportunity to benefit in the financial upside of a venture fund, you had to be a general partner or a partner at that venture fund. And so therefore, the number of people that could participate in that was very small. Or, if you weren't an employee at the fund, you could be an investor in the fund, right? But in order to be a qualified limited partner in the fund, the access to capital that you would need would be significant. So I believe that this really is groundbreaking because it democratizes access to venture returns across our entire portfolio. And it really allows everyday people with $100 to participate in the work that we're doing and realize the upside of investing in underrepresented founders.
Yeah, and I love that Christie said, everyday people. I think at large, people get that this is an opportunity, investing in more and more people that are diverse. That just seems like it's becoming something that a lot of people are recognizing, even if venture is slow to move. The individual sees oh, these are really cool companies, and these are people that look like me, and different people are getting involved, and being able to invest in us is just pretty huge opportunity. Looking at some of the comments as to why people got involved and why they decided to invest, a lot of it's that they really believe in this as a movement, and that it's now representing them, and that they can see themselves in what we're building. And that's super important. And I also think, just one other point, I think we've talked a lot about financial capital. But opening up the crowd fund has allowed people to kind of get part of this knowledge capital that unfortunately has only been shared within like venture and very small circles, where if you're able to invest in a company or invest in Backstage, you're now part of understanding how this whole system works. So, maybe you take that first, toe in the water at $100 and you're understanding, okay, this is my first investment and this is how it works. Before you know it, you could be more and more engaged in making other investments or just really participating in this kind of wealth creation that's been a lot of underrepresented people have been locked out of. So I think it's pretty big on a lot of different fronts, but I think kind of this like knowledge capital that I would love to get to more people. This is one avenue to do that.
Yeah, that point about knowledge and education is so important because, I mean, just generally investing knowledge, financial literacy, for people who just traditionally been underrepresented, but really anyone who didn't grow up with a significant amount of wealth or focus on investment conversations, to realize that this is when you invest, of course, there's the focus on financial returns, but when you do invest in something like this, you're getting regular updates. You're getting inside knowledge from the fund, from the companies about what's happening to your investment. And I think that's so important in terms of especially educating women and minorities about how far your dollar can go in terms of the double bottom line.
I think there's something else that just came to mind here that's important to mention too, which is about power. And the reality is that as underrepresented people, when we're in situations where we're experiencing bias or oppression, we do not have the power to change those situations or those systems just one by one. And it can be really infuriating and exhausting. And Backstage is doing the work of trying to change the systemic oppression and systemic bias in the venture and tech ecosystem. And by having the crowd fund open, anybody can take some power into their hands by being part of that. So you can actually invest in the world that you want to be a part of. And I think that that's so important because it's just really helpful to feel like there's something that you can do to change things. And our team, this is, our life's work. This is what we're dedicated to doing. And by joining others and investing in us, you're helping set us up for a more stable future and enable us to do the work for a long time to come. And so I think that it's just important to note that we're taking the power back in a way by opening up our finances to the crowd and giving the crowd the opportunity to support us.
Amazing. Well, I'm super excited about Backstage Capital and the future of the founders that you're investing in. So for everyone who's listening, we will be diving even deeper into Backstage Capital, the traction, the team, what's going on behind the scenes. And this will be for exclusively our Confident Investor Club members. So make sure you check that out. And we will be back for our next episode soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks.